So here's a question for you. What if something arrived at the edge of our solar system that didn't follow any of the rules we've spent centuries writing down? What if the universe, just for a moment, decided to whisper something so impossible, so completely against everything we thought we knew, that some of the world's most brilliant minds are still scrambling to figure out what they actually witnessed? This is the story of Atlas. And trust me, by the time we are done here, you're going to understand why the scientific community is quietly losing its mind. Let me set the stage. We're talking November 11th, just a few weeks ago. Astronomers around the world had their telescopes pointed at what they thought was just another comet making its usual journey through space. Comets are common. They're these icy relics that drift through the solar system all the time. We've catalogued thousands of them. We know what they do.
They warm up when they approach the sun, a little bit of ice sublimes away, they grow a tail, they put on a show, and then they drift back into the cosmic darkness where they came from. Routine stuff. Boring stuff, honestly. But Atlas wasn't going to cooperate with that narrative. What started as what looked like a normal, unremarkable speck of light, just another nameless object drifting silently around the sun, suddenly woke up. And I mean really woke up. Just as this thing passed perihelion, which is that closest point to the sun, something switched on, something responded. And when telescopes around the world started recording what was happening, the data coming back was so strange that scientists actually had to stop and ask themselves if their instruments were malfunctioning. I want you to picture this. Imagine you're looking at something with the naked eye and suddenly it gets 5 times brighter, just like that, 5 times. That's not a gradual change. That's not subtle. That's an object saying, hey, I'm here and I'm doing something. And when they looked closer, they saw that this thing's optical structure, basically how it was emitting light and how it was shaped, it completely shattered every single model they had for how comets behave. But here's where it gets really weird. A tail appeared. Now, comet tails are something we understand. The sun's radiation pressure, basically the force of light itself pushing outward, takes dust and ice particles and blows them away from the comet's core, creating this beautiful ethereal tail that fans out behind it like a trail of cosmic dust. We've seen thousands of them, but this tail, this thing was different. It wasn't fanned out like you'd expect. It wasn't drifting with a solar wind. Instead, it was shot straight out into space, straight, like a beam, defying the very force of radiation that should have been pushing it in all directions. And it got weirder from there. From the object's core, and I want you to really picture this, strange beams of light radiated in multiple directions. Multiple. Not one, not two, but several distinct beams of light creating this geometric pattern that was so unusual, so perfectly ordered, that even the classical models of physics, the ones we've been using for centuries, just threw up their hands and said, we don't know what this is. One of those beams? It was pointing directly back toward the sun. I need to make sure you understand how impossible that is. The sun is the most powerful force in the solar system. It pushes, it radiates, it sends energy outward in all directions, and nothing pushes back against that. Nothing. It's thermodynamically impossible. Matter and energy move away from the sun's radiation. They don't resist it. They don't push against it. It's like trying to swim upstream in the most powerful river in the world while the current is constantly accelerating. Yet there it was. So naturally, scientists started thinking, okay, maybe there's something mechanical going on here. Maybe there's some kind of malfunction. Maybe the data from one observatory got corrupted somehow. So they looked at readings from Chile. They looked at observations from Hawaii. They looked at data points from observatories across the entire planet, and every single one showed the same thing. Not different, not contradictory, the same exact phenomenon. And here's the kicker, it was rhythmic. The gas escaping from Atlas was following a pattern, a steady, rhythmic pattern. Almost like, and I hate using this word because it sounds unscientific, but pre-programmed. Like something was controlling the emissions with precision. Not random bursts, not chaotic sublimation. Regular, pulsing jets of gas escaping at about 150 meters per second. And here's the problem with that. That speed is way too slow.
way too slow to maintain structure in the solar wind. If you released gas at that speed, it should immediately dissipate. It should scatter. It should become invisible within seconds. But it didn't. The gas stayed coherent. It maintained structure. It looked like invisible pillars of energy anchored to the object's core. And you know what the rhythm was? Every 9 hours. Every single 9 hours, without fail, this thing was pulsing, like a breathing structure, like something that was alive and taking breaths in the cold vacuum of space. Scientists were starting to reach for theories, but each one was falling apart almost immediately. Could the gas be escaping through cracks in the surface? No. Cracking doesn't produce a steady stream. Could it be related to the object's rotation? No. Atlas was rotating too slowly. Could it be thermal sublimation? No, because thermal sublimation doesn't follow a 9-hour cycle. It's random, it's chaotic, it's not rhythmic. This is when things started getting interesting. And by interesting, I mean genuinely unsettling. Because when the random models failed, people had to start considering something much more complicated. What if the gas wasn't just escaping randomly? What if it was being channeled? What if there was a system underneath the surface, like a network of internal channels or vents, that was precisely controlling how and when the gas was released? Think about that for a moment. That would mean Atlas wasn't just some ancient rock that happened to thaw a little bit when it got close to the sun. That would mean Atlas had an internal mechanism, some kind of structure, some kind of system capable of regulating its own emissions with precision. Now, that's not something you usually see in nature. That's something you see in engineered systems. But nobody wanted to say that out loud yet. The real confirmation came when the European Southern Observatory ran simulations. They tried to model what was happening using natural processes: wind, radiation, thermal effects, all the usual suspects. Their random flow model collapsed within hours. It just didn't match reality. But then they tried something different. They modeled it as if the gas was being directed through oriented vents, controlled channels. And you know what? The model reproduced the exact jet structure they were observing. Perfectly. So now you have a situation where the only model that works is the one that assumes some kind of intentional structure. And the reports? They cautiously mentioned unusual wet columns, suggesting local vents or channel structures. Very careful language. Nobody used the word design, but everybody was thinking it. The symmetry was undeniable. The precision was undeniable. And the question was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Was this something nature had created? Or was it something that had been created and then nature had tried to hide? Some scientists started theorizing that maybe Atlas was some kind of unknown physical form, a new type of object that we'd never encountered before. Others suggested it might be an ancient system that had somehow awakened when it got close to the sun, like someone flipping a switch after billions of years of dormancy. And that's actually not a crazy thought. If something was designed or engineered a long time ago and then put to sleep, and then it approached a source of intense energy like our sun, maybe that would activate it. What's strange about that possibility is that the transformation happens so fast. One moment, Atlas was just a regular comet. The next moment, it wasn't following any rules. It was like an internal switch had been flipped. From that moment on, Atlas stopped being an ordinary object and became something else entirely. It became a natural experiment where all the familiar patterns, the patterns we've been studying for our entire modern scientific era, began to bend under something invisible. Some researchers called it the object remembering how to behave. Like it had been dormant for so long that when it was activated, it remembered its original function. Others thought maybe it was responding to an ancient stimulus, light or heat, or some condition that had been encoded into its structure billions of years ago. Whatever the reason, one thing was becoming clear. The universe had just handed us a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere in our current understanding. But then something interesting happened. After its third close pass to the sun, what we call a perihelion, Atlas went silent. Completely silent. For weeks, there were no jets, no optical signals, no strange beams of light. Just a faint glow from its metallic surface. Nothing else. pure silence.
Scientists were analyzing the data, trying to figure out what came next, when on October 24th, the Meerkat radio telescope in South Africa picked up something extraordinary. Two narrow lines, one at 1.65 GHz and one at 1.667 GHz, and they were unmistakable. This was the hydroxyl fingerprint, the signature of water vapor. It was like Atlas was whispering for the first time since it had gone quiet. Just two clean lines of radio emission. Just enough to say, I'm still here, I'm still doing something. Now, hydroxyl signatures are familiar in comet studies. We see them all the time. When comets release water vapor, we detect these specific frequencies. That's normal. But the timing made absolutely no sense. Atlas had passed its hotspot. It should have been cooling down. The closer it gets to the sun, the more of its ices sublimate and turn to gas. The farther it moves away, the colder it gets, and that sublimation should slow down.
That's basic thermodynamics. So, if Atlas was getting farther from the sun, it should have been releasing less water vapor, not more. But it was detecting more water vapor precisely when it was turning away from the sun, precisely when it should have been cooling down. And here's the really strange part. It was like the object was waiting for the right angle, like it was timing its emissions based on its position relative to the sun, not its temperature, not how much energy it was receiving, but its geometry, its position. Scientists looked at the possibility of cracked ice. Maybe there was ice underneath the surface that had been shielded from the sun, and now that the object had rotated, it was being exposed. But the spectrum was too clean, too precise. If you had cracks in ice releasing gas randomly, you'd see a messy spectrum, lots of different frequencies with varied intensities. But this was clean. This was controlled. One researcher called it methodical leakage, like gas was escaping through a perfectly tuned valve. Someone had turned the valve just the right amount, and now water vapor was being released at precisely the right rate to produce that clean, strong signal. Modeling from research institutes suggested that the object might have a nickel-carbon shell trapping it inside, causing a delayed release of gas as it cooled. That could explain why emissions happened after the object passed the sun. But it still couldn't explain the precision. It couldn't explain why the signal lasted exactly 36 hours and then stopped. It couldn't explain the 9-hour pulsing rhythm we'd seen before. Some researchers started using the term autoregulation. They were suggesting that Atlas had some kind of biological rhythm, something etched into it like a living thing. But here's where people started asking the uncomfortable question. Is the precision too perfect to be random? Could it be responding to a specific band of radiation? Could there be some kind of chemical resonance happening? Could this be an ancient circuit waiting for a wake-up call? Now I know how that sounds. It sounds like conspiracy theory. It sounds like people are getting carried away with speculation. But here's the thing. The math was slowly ruling out the random scenario. The more data they collected, the less random it looked. In early November, ALMA, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, one of the most powerful radio telescopes in the world, confirmed the pulse again. Just a single pulse that lasted 2 days and then faded, just like before. The NASA report described it as a transient, non-recurring hydroxyl absorption event, which is scientists speak for something weird happened and we are not sure what it was. But the observers, the people who were actually watching this data come in real time, they were haunted by what came next. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that makes you uncomfortable. Not gradual fading, not a slow decline into noise. Just silence. Like someone had turned off a switch. If this was natural, if it was just a comet doing comet things, the emissions should have continued gradually fading. That's how physics works. That's how thermodynamics works. Things slow down gradually. But this was different. It was too disciplined, too controlled,
like something was deliberately turning emissions on and off. So now you have two possibilities forming in the minds of scientists. Either Atlas has some incredibly elaborate gas emission system buried deep underneath its surface that we don't understand yet, or it's being driven by something beyond familiar physics, something we don't have a framework for explaining. And then, the orbit started doing something impossible. By early November, Atlas's predicted orbit, the path through space that scientists had calculated it should follow, started deviating. Not by huge amounts. The changes were measured in arcseconds, tiny fractions of degrees. But they were consistent, and they were undeniable. Fractions of an arcsecond here, 4 arcseconds there, but add them all up, and it became clear that Atlas was no longer following pure gravity. There had been no visible collisions. There had been no solar storms. There had been no measurable outgassing events. Yet Atlas continued to move with a steady anti-gravitational acceleration, like it was being guided by an invisible force. When data from ALMA was combined with observations from Pan-STARRS, another major survey telescope, the deviation became absolutely undeniable. We are talking about a negative acceleration of about 2 × 10 to the -7th meters per second squared. That might sound tiny, but this acceleration extended over millions of kilometers. It wasn't fluctuating based on rotation. It wasn't changing with how hot or cold the object was. It was fixed.
Constant.
Like Atlas knew its own path and was following it intentionally. The natural hypothesis, the idea that this was just normal comet behavior, was becoming increasingly untenable. And it got weirder when scientists realized this was reminiscent of something that had happened 40 years ago, something called Oumuamua, an interstellar visitor that also showed unexplained acceleration and also seemed to have some kind of hidden architecture. Some researchers started seriously considering a wild idea. What if Atlas had a physical memory? What if it had been formed in an ancient magnetic environment and now, approaching our sun, it was awakening? What if it was responding to stimuli it hadn't experienced in billions of years? But then, something happened. Mid-November, the mysterious acceleration just stopped. Abruptly. Like a switch had been flipped again. Atlas locked onto a new orbit and faded into darkness. When it reappeared, when our telescopes picked it up again, everybody was unprepared for what they found. Instead of fading quietly into the distance like a normal comet, Atlas was emitting 5 steady streams of gas. Not 1, not 2, 5. And they were pointing in 5 different directions, including one that pointed straight at the sun. A complete, absolute violation of radiation physics. When spectroscopic analysis confirmed this wasn't some kind of observational error, when they checked and double-checked and triple-checked the data, the realization set in. There is no natural law that could explain how a column of gas could resist the pressure of light for days. It's impossible. It shouldn't happen. But it was happening. And then the color changed. Over the course of just a few days, Atlas shifted from a dull red to a metallic blue. A dramatic change. Scientists analyzed the spectra and found signatures consistent with nickel-rich silicates, materials that are pretty common in planetary cores but extremely rare in comets. You don't usually find nickel in abundance in these icy objects. Nickel is something you'd find in the solid core of a planet or in certain engineered materials. This raised the possibilities that made people uncomfortable. What if Atlas wasn't a primordial mass of ice? What if it was a fragment of something much older, something much more substantial? And then the data started disappearing. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the MRO, had been collecting high-resolution images of Atlas as it passed. These images were supposed to reveal fine details of the object's surface, maybe help us understand what it actually was. But the images were delayed, 3 weeks delayed. And when they finally were released, they were compressed, they were cropped, they were missing frames. NASA's official explanation? Calibration issues. A perfectly reasonable explanation for why important data would be delayed and then released in degraded form. But experts who looked at what little data was available, they discussed unusual surface shapes. They talked about uniform blue flashes. They had questions. Multiple requests for transparency were made to regulatory agencies and NASA itself. Multiple requests for the uncompressed, complete data. And the response was silence. The same kind of silence that had surrounded Atlas's emissions. The same kind of silence that makes scientists uncomfortable. Because silence usually means someone is deciding what information should be public and what should stay hidden. Meanwhile, outside the official scientific community, theories were flying. Ancient probes, eroded artifacts from a civilization that's been dead for billions of years, a structure that carries memories of its birthplace. Speculation was filling the void left by missing data. And you know what happens when speculation fills the void? Myth starts forming. Conspiracy theories take root. But amid all the mystery and the data gaps and the unanswered questions, something was happening in the numbers themselves. Spectroscopic analysis of Atlas was revealing something that made scientists sit back in their chairs. The oxygen and carbon isotope ratios were inconsistent with any object born in our solar system. Not close, not maybe, inconsistent, completely different. ALMA cross-checked and confirmed it. Atlas originated from a star system that was at least 7 billion years old. 7 billion. That's older than Earth. That's older than our solar system. That's from an ancient era of the universe we barely understand. And here's the really unsettling part. Rather than being worn away like an ancient rock should be after floating through space for billions of years, Atlas appeared strangely preserved, like it had once been shielded or maintained, like someone had taken care of it. When the surface composition was reconstructed from the spectral data, surprises kept emerging. Nickel and iron were much more abundant than in natural comets. Way more abundant. And nickel, real talk. Nickel is a durable metal found in technological alloys used in spacecraft and turbines. It's not the kind of thing you usually see in large quantities in a comet. The usual mixture is ice and silicon. But this had metal. Real, substantial metal. Some scientists proposed that maybe Atlas was the metallic core of a planet. That maybe back in the chaotic early days of its star system, there was a collision. One of those massive planetary smash-ups that can happen when gravity is reorganizing systems. And Atlas was ripped apart. That would partially explain its incredible durability. It would be like holding the literal heart of a world. But even that theory couldn't explain everything. Not the balance of elements, not the stable magnetic response, not the ability to retain heat far beyond what typical comet materials could manage. These characteristics, the more they looked at them, the more they looked like an engineered alloy.
Like something that had been designed and constructed rather than naturally formed. And here's where people started whispering thoughts they wouldn't say out loud officially. What if Atlas could be the remains of a vanished civilization? Not a complete ship, not a fully functional structure, but fragments, remnants of something that had been functioning once and had been eroded by time and space until it looked more like geology than technology. Its reflectivity matched nickel compounds similar to man-made materials here on Earth. Its magnetic response was strangely organic in a way that could be natural or could be something else entirely. Could be the consequence of a harsh alien environment, or could be the remnants of a design so ancient that it had started to look geological. The data didn't prove it, but it suggested it, and that suggestion was enough to make people deeply uncomfortable because natural models kept failing. Over and over again, the more sophisticated the model, the better the model, the more it seemed like reality was insisting that Atlas wasn't natural. And then someone did something interesting. Someone decided to track Atlas's orbit backward to see where it had come from. And when they did the calculations, they made a discovery that had people talking in hushed tones. The orbit returned to an area near where something called the WOW signal had been detected in 1977. Now, the WOW signal is a big deal in the history of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. On August 15, 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio picked up a mysterious 72-second radio pulse at 1,420 megahertz, right in the band of neutral hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and it's been considered a plausible channel for any supposed intelligent signal. The signal was so unusual that the astronomer who spotted it literally circled it on the printout and wrote "Wow" next to it. Hence the name. For decades, nobody could explain it. Was it a signal from an alien civilization? Was it a natural phenomenon? Was it interference from human technology? Nobody knew. And then it was gone, never repeated, never explained. Fast forward to now, Atlas is emitting post-perihelion bursts at 1.65 and 1.667 gigahertz frequencies aligned with the hydroxyl family, basically the two frequencies that correspond to the water molecule, the frequencies of life. The frequencies that SETI scientists have always thought might be used for communication. Now, you could say coincidence, you could absolutely say that frequencies are common in space. Lots of natural phenomena produce radio waves. But here's the thing, when someone did the math, when they calculated the odds of two events 50 years apart matching both in frequency and location in space, the odds came out to about 1 in 10,000. Not impossible, but low enough to make people sit up and pay attention. And when Harvard-Smithsonian reprocessed the WOW data using modern algorithms that didn't exist in 1977, they found additional sidebands that overlapped with hydroxyl. They found something that had been there all along but invisible to the older technology. The connection was becoming harder to ignore. Some researchers suggested a compromise theory. Maybe both WOW and Atlas could be the result of natural hydrogen resonances in interstellar clouds. Maybe they accidentally amplify certain regions of space. If so, maybe Atlas isn't actually sending signals. Maybe it's just carrying the chemical signature of where it came from, an artifact. A messenger that doesn't mean to be sending messages, but there was a broader interpretation that people weren't afraid to express anymore. If WOW was a solitary call and had a voice crying out into the darkness, then maybe Atlas is the physical remains of where that call came from. Maybe Atlas is the source. One researcher wrote something that really captured the moment. Perhaps Atlas is not a messenger, but a fossil of an effort that has outlived the hand that created it. Think about that for a moment. A fossil of an effort, something that was made, something that was sent out or deployed, and now, billions of years later, it's drifting toward us, carrying the memory of whoever made it. That's a humbling thought. That's actually a poignant thought. In a universe where planets and stars have long since been forgotten, where civilizations rise and fall and are erased by time, there exists a drifting fragment of matter that carries the memory of something alien, something that once was, something that tried to communicate across the cosmic void. The ingress trajectory of Atlas coincided with a quarter in the sky where WOW had once flashed not perfectly, about 9 degrees off that, but close enough to be a puzzle piece that fit the picture, close enough to make you wonder. Maybe WOW and Atlas are completely unrelated. Maybe it's a cosmic coincidence so massive that it's actually proof that nothing is a coincidence, that the universe is just random events with no meaning. Or maybe after billions of years and many light years of distance, they're two pieces of the same story. One written in radio waves from Earth in 1977, the other written in light and alloy as it approaches us now. As usual, the universe doesn't answer. It whispers just enough to make you wonder if you're hearing a message or just sensing an echo of the unknown. As Atlas faded into the distance, moving beyond Mars's orbit, sinking into the darkness where sunlight was an echo, it carried no answers but the silent existence of an object billions of years older than Earth. That carried information that meant something. And gradually, as scientists across the world analyzed everything they had collected, a conclusion emerged. Whatever Atlas was, it didn't match a comet, it didn't match an asteroid, it didn't match any known category of object we have. It was an exception, a reminder that the universe is made up of deviations rather than rules. In the purity of our equations, and in the clean mathematics that we write on whiteboards and in textbooks, we like to believe we understand how matter behaves, we understand how light scatters, we understand the fundamental laws. We've spent centuries refining these models. We've built technology on top of them. We've gone to the moon and sent robots to Mars based on these equations being correct. But then something emerges from the darkness, and it behaves differently, without pattern, without explanation. It forces us to remember something we try not to admit. all our laws are just temporary agreements with nature. They're valid until something comes along that doesn't follow them, until the next stranger passes by. Atlas has left more questions than answers. A breathing structure without a tail, an acceleration without a thrust, a signal that does not repeat, a color without a chemical match, a deliberation that seems almost intentional. Each puzzle might have a solution hidden in probability theory, or it might just be human bias, our tendency to find meaning in chaos, to see patterns that aren't there. We're wired that way. Our brains evolved to find patterns because patterns helped us survive, but sometimes there are no patterns. Sometimes there's just randomness. But here's the thing, until we dare to admit what we don't know, discovery remains just an open destination. We're standing at a door we haven't opened yet. Atlas's unusual movement forces astronomers to confront an uncomfortable paradox: skepticism and imagination. Instead of being at odds, instead of being enemies, they have to work together. They have to be two essential pieces of the same puzzle when faced with something unnamed and mysterious, observing something strange without immediately calling it a miracle, allowing for speculation without abandoning reason. That's the true spirit of science. That's what science should be. We can calculate orbits with millisecond precision. We can predict where objects will be years in advance. We have tools that would seem like magic to scientists from a century ago, but every step forward, every real discovery requires humility, especially when the universe gently reminds us what we thought was certain was actually just provisional, just waiting for the next visitor to prove us wrong. When asked directly about what Atlas represents, what it means, what the implications are, Avi gave an answer that was simple and direct. Either this is an entirely new type of natural object, something physics hasn't properly categorized or understood yet, or we've just seen the remnants of something that was created: the architectural elements, the intentional behavior, the precision. In either case, the universe has asked us to expand the limits of our understanding, and that seems to capture the spirit of this moment. Data and surprise colliding. Think about that, because it's true from both directions. If Atlas is natural, then nature has learned to imitate purpose. It has learned to create structures that look designed. It has learned to encode behavior that looks intentional. Nature is capable of things we don't understand, but if Atlas isn't natural, if it's engineered, then purpose has existed long enough to become geology, long enough to become meteorite, long enough to look like nature, and the line between chance and purpose begins to blur. When you zoom out far enough, when you look at the universe at the scale of billions of years, the distinction between designed and natural starts to disappear. History shows us something important here. Every scientific revolution in human history, and I mean every single one, has begun not with certainty but with confusion. The heliocentric model, the idea that Earth orbits the sun rather than the reverse, that was once considered heresy. Quantum mechanics didn't emerge from clear understanding. It emerged from a series of contradictions that forced physicists to rethink everything. Relativity wasn't born from obvious truth. It was born from a stubborn little anomaly that Newton couldn't explain. Just this tiny discrepancy in Mercury's orbit that wouldn't go away. Maybe Atlas is such an anomaly, a silent messenger of an unwritten chapter of physics. Its lesson isn't to believe in aliens or miracles. That's not the point. The lesson is to believe in the unknown, to see each anomaly as an invitation rather than a problem to be solved and forgotten, to let the data speak for themselves before dogma rushes in to fill the void. Because here's what happens when you rush to fill the void: when you're too confident in your models, when you dismiss anomalies as errors or measurement mistakes, when you hide data rather than release it. If the next visitor comes and we're too confident in our own understanding, we might miss the most important message. We might dismiss something extraordinary as mundane. We might look directly at the truth and decide it's too inconvenient to acknowledge. Transparency, open data, interdisciplinary dialogue, these aren't luxuries. They're not optional parts of science. They're requirements for survival in a universe that continually refuses to conform to human expectations. When information is withheld, whether out of caution or fear of speculation, a vacuum forms. And nature abhors a vacuum. So fiction fills it, myth fills it, conspiracy theories fill it. They multiply and grow and become more elaborate. And once myth is born, it's not easily silenced. Perhaps that's the true legacy of Atlas, not what it actually is, but what it holds up as a mirror to us, a reminder of our need for control, our fear of making mistakes, the delicate balance we have to maintain between evidence and wonder, between skepticism and imagination, between what we know and what we're willing to admit we don't know. And perhaps the ending isn't one that provides answers, perhaps it's one that just leaves a pause, a question mark hanging in the air. Because the real question is this: is the next cosmic oddity just around the corner? Or are we finally learning to listen to what the universe has been trying to tell us all along? That's the mystery of Atlas, and that's why people like me can't stop talking about it.